Hi, thank you for joining me. My name is Mindy Mandell, and this video is part of a series of videos on Proclus's Elements of Theology. I will link the playlist here for anyone who wants to see the full playlist. But today what I'll be talking about in this video is propositions 172 through 175. And as always, I am using the E.R. Dodds translation. And for those of you who don't have the paper version of the text, there is a link in the description box for a PDF version. Okay, so starting with proposition 172. Every intelligence is directly constitutive of things which are perpetual, and, as regards their existence, invariable. So here Proclus is looking at what is the direct consequent, the direct resultant of intellects. What intellects are directly the cause of or productive of. And notice the words, as regards their existence. This proposition then leaves open the possibility of a product being variable in its activity. Now, Proclus starts off, for all products of an unmoved cause are invariable in their existence. And notice here that Dodds cites proposition 76. And this one reads, all that arises from an unmoved cause has an invariable substance. All that arises from a mobile cause has a variable substance. And substance here is hyparxis. So again, we're talking about the being of the cause is invariable. The activity is not mentioned. The activity, therefore, might be eternal, such as another intellect in the series, or it might be in time, such as intellect unfolding the next realm, that of soul. Okay, so we have established that all products of an unmoved cause are invariable in their existence. And now he goes on to say that intelligence is unmoved, being eternal in every sense and steadfast in eternity. This was established in proposition 169. That was in my last video, so let me quickly refresh your memories. This is the one that reads, every intelligence has its existence, its potency, and its activity in eternity. And Proclus wraps this up by stating, again, it is in virtue of its being that intelligence gives rise to its products. And if its being is perpetual and unchanging, so also is its productive activity. Therefore, its effects exist not at certain times only, but perpetually. So intellect does not move, it overflows from its very being while remaining steadfast. And here's the proposition that Dodds cited that states this very point, that every productive cause produces the next and all subsequent principles while itself remaining steadfast. For if it imitates the one, and if the one brings its consequence into existence without movement, then every productive cause has a like law of production. So what we are really seeing here in proposition 172 is intellect as a productive cause. This proposition then is an application of the one that I reviewed at the opening, proposition 76, which states that unmoved causes give rise to invariable existences and mobile causes give rise to variable existences. Okay, going on to proposition 173, this one reads, every intelligence is intellectually identical, both with its priors and with its consequence, with the latter as their cause, with the former by participation. But since it is itself an intelligence and its essence is intellectual, it defines everything, both what it is as cause and what it is by participation, according to its own substantive character. Okay, intellects must know all, To know only a part would mean to be ignorant of the rest. This was already rejected back in Proposition 170. And just as a reminder, this one reads, every intelligence has simultaneous intellection of all things, but while the unparticipated intelligence knows all unconditionally, each subsequent intelligence knows all in one especial aspect. So every intellect knows all in some special way. Okay, now back to Proposition 173. Here, this is being clarified a bit more. Each intellect knows all in a way that is proper to its station. To more clearly see what is going on here, I'm going to jump now to the explanation. And Proclus starts off, for each principle participates its superiors in the measure of its natural capacity, and not in the measure of their being. So two possibilities of how participation functions are mentioned here. One is accepted, the other rejected. Participation is either by natural capacity or by the measure of the participated's being. We see that Proclus accepted the first and rejected the second. Now let's see why. And Proclus explains, on the latter supposition, they must be participated in the same manner by all things, which is not the case. Therefore, participation varies with the distinctive character and capacity of the participants. In other words, if participation and intellect were based on the measure of the intellect's being, then all who participate it would participate it equally. But of course, this is not the case. Therefore, participation must be according to the aptitude of the participant. And we saw similar reasoning, by the way, back in Proposition 142, which looked at the issue of participation from the perspective of the gods. And this is one of the more famous propositions. This one reads, the gods are present alike to all things. Not all things, however, are present alike to the gods. But each order has a share in their presence proportioned to its station and capacity, some things receiving them as unities and others as manifolds, some perpetually and others for a time, some incorporeally and others through the body. And I'll scroll down just a little because in the explanation he ends by saying that while the gods are present alike to all things, not all things are present alike to them. Each order is present to the degree of its capacity, and it enjoys them in the degree of its presence, which is the measure of its participation. By similar reasoning, then, we can see that participating intellect varies depending on the aptitude of the participant. And Proclus goes on, in the intelligence, accordingly, its priors are contained intellectually. Now, intelligence with a capital I refers to the unparticipated monad intelligence or intellect. This participates the henads, and we're seeing that it participates them as is appropriate to its station. In other words, it participates them intellectually. And going on to the next paragraph, Proclus writes, but again, it is also intellectually identical with its consequence. So Proclus is now looking at the relationship between an intellect and its consequence. For it is not composite of its resultants. What it contains is not the resultants, but their causes. And this is what it means to say that the resultants or the products are contained causally in their causes. The cause contains the power to unfold the resultant or the consequent. Okay, now Proclus goes on. Now it is in virtue of its being that it causes all things. And there again is that proposition 26, that intellect is a cause and virtue of its being. It unfolds while remaining steadfast and unchanging in itself. And, Proclus goes on, its being is intellectual. Hence, it contains intellectually the causes of all things. Much as it participates intellectually according to its own capacity, so does it contain the causes of its resultants intellectually. And this is very much consistent with Proposition 103. This proposition was not cited by Dodds, but I think it's a good one to look back at. All things are in all things, but in each according to its proper nature. For in being there is life and intelligence, in life being in intelligence being in life. But each of these exists upon one level intellectually, upon another vitally, and on the third existentially. So at the level of intellect, all exists intellectually. So again, what we're seeing in these later propositions is various ways of applying the propositions that were laid out in the first half of the book as that basic framework into which reality unfolds. So with that in mind, here is Proclus's conclusion for Proposition 173. Thus, every intelligence is all things intellectually, both its priors and its consequence. That is to say, as it contains the intelligible world intellectually, so also it contains the sensible world in the same mode. I really like Proposition 174. This is another one that has rich imagery, and it makes for a profound meditation. Here's the proposition. Every intelligence gives rise to its consequence by the act of intellection. Its creative activity is thinking, and its thought is creation. Now, this idea has actually come up in my discussions of previous propositions, but now Proclus is formally introducing this principle. The recursive act is also a creative act. And here's Proclus's reasoning. And he starts off, for if intelligence is identical with its object, and the existence of each intelligence with its thought, and if further it creates by existing all that it creates, and produces by virtue of being what it is, then it must constitute its products by the act of thought. Okay, there are many parts here, many ifs leading to his conclusion. I'm going to take it piece by piece and show you each of the past propositions that Proclus is now building on. So the first piece is that intellect is identical with its object. And Dodds helps us out by citing Proposition 167. This one reads, every intelligence has intuitive knowledge of itself. But the primal intelligence knows itself only, and intelligence and its object are here numerically one, whereas each subsequent intelligence knows simultaneously itself and its priors, so that its object is in part itself, but in part its source. Okay, so we saw there that all intellects revert on themselves, and they're all identical with their content, which is the object of their reversion. Okay, that's the first piece. The next is that the existence of each intellect is identical with its thought. I think this is already easy enough to see from what we saw in Proposition 167, but it is spelled out more directly in Proposition 169. And this is the one that told us that every intelligence has its existence, its potency, and its activity in eternity. And he clarified in the body here that the intellective act is identical with the existence. Okay, so far so good. Now there is a further if that this argument is based on. If it creates by existing all that it creates and produces by further virtue of being what it is. The wording here is a little odd, I feel, but this is another reference to Proposition 26. For this phrase, creates by existing all that it creates, Thomas Taylor translated as produces by essence. Intellects produce from their very being and by the very essence of what they are. They are steadfast and unmoving in their production. And here again is the text for 26, and we can see here that it imitates the one, and so therefore it produces without movement. What follows from these three conditions is the last part. It creates by the act of thinking, the act of thought. Thinking is the very activity of intellect, and it is a creative act. For its existence and its intellection are one thing, since intelligence is identical with the being which is its content. And this is basically a review of Propositions 167 and 69. And so this leads to this conclusion. If then it creates by existing and its existence is thought, then it creates by the act of thinking. And Proclus concludes, again, its thought is actualized in the act of thinking, which is identical with its existence. And its existence is creation, for that which creates without movement has its existence perpetually in the creative act. Therefore, its thought too is creation. Reverting to itself and knowing its content is the activity of thinking, and this activity is identical with the content. Now, if intellect creates by its very being, then its existence is creative. And if its thought is identical with its existence, then its thought must also be creative. Intellect turns on itself, it fills itself with the content of its being, and it overflows in an act of creation. And hence the statement at the top here, that every intelligence gives rise to its consequence by the act of intellection. Its creative activity is thinking, and its thought is creation. It's worth taking some time to sit with this proposition, because discursive thought alone does not do it justice. It's not enough just to follow the logic. You really need to visualize this one, to contemplate it, to really see it. The divine act of creation is being described here in this one short proposition. Okay, going on to Proposition 175. This one reads, every intelligence is primarily participated by principles which are intellectual at once in their existence and in their activity. And this is to some degree intuitive. I mean, anything that participates intellect must be intellectual. But here we're seeing that the participant is intellectual, both in its essence and its activity. And the explanation begins. For if not by these, then by principles which have an intellectual existence, but do not at all times exercise intellection. But this is impossible. And so this is what Proclus is telling us would be the alternative to his proposition. And he starts off by stating that the activity of intelligence is without movement. The eternal is beyond the motion required by time. Dodd cites Proposition 169. I've already reviewed that one, but I'll just quickly look at it again. And just as a quick reminder, this is the one that reads that every intelligence has its existence, its potency, and its activity in eternity. And so Proclus established that intellect is in every way eternal. And so he concludes here that consequently those principles which participated do so at all times, enjoying a perpetual intellection whereof the activity of the intelligence perpetually makes them capable. Because intellects are eternal in both their activity and their essence, their participants perpetually participate them. Proclus is going to go on from here now to draw from Proposition 55. And I think a quick review of that will make the next sentence easier to understand. And Proposition 55 reads, "Of things which exist in time, some have a perpetual duration, while others have a dated existence in a part of time." So this is the proposition that distinguished the eternal from the perpetual. That which is eternal exists as a simultaneous whole. It is outside of time. But that which is perpetual exists throughout the whole of time. Now, some things in time exist throughout the whole of it, while other things, like physical things, for example, pass into existence for a set period, and then they pass out of existence. That which participates intellect must exist perpetually for the whole of time. And you see the yellow part here. There must be an intermediate order which resembles the eternals in one respect, but differs from them in the other. There must be a median between the eternal and that which exists in time temporarily, and that median is the perpetual. Okay, back at Prop 175, Proclus writes, "For a being which has its activity in some certain part of time is discontinuous with one whose activity is eternal. As with existences, so in the gradations of activity, there is an intermediate degree between any activity which is eternal and one which is complete in a certain time, namely the activity which has its completion in the whole of time." So again, the perpetual is that median between the eternal and the temporary. And notice that here Proclus is extending this principle to activities as well as to essences. And Proclus explains, "For nowhere does procession take place without mediation, but always through terms which are akin and alike." And Proposition 29 simply states that all procession is accomplished through likeness. And here it is. All procession is accomplished through a likeness of the secondary to the primary. So the eternal and the temporary are two different. The perpetual, on the other hand, is like the eternal in one respect and unlike it in another. So this then is the median. Proclus also applied this basic principle in Proposition 129. And this one reads, "All divine bodies are such through the mediation of a divinized soul, all divine souls through a divine intelligence, and all divine intelligences by participation in a divine Henad. The Henad is immediate deity, the intelligence is most divine, the soul is divine, and the body is dissimilar." So here we're seeing an application of the law of similitude. And we have another application in today's proposition, number 175. And coming back to Proposition 175, Proclus adds that this law of similitude holds for the grades of completeness in activities, no less than for substances. And Proclus concludes this paragraph with, accordingly, every intelligence is primarily participated by principles which are at all times capable of intellection and enjoy it perpetually, notwithstanding that they exercise it in time and not in eternity. And so Proclus is positing a perpetual soul as the median between the physical world and the world of intellect. Now, this really is an application of that Proposition 55 where we saw the perpetual, and that draws, of course, on the law of similitude. Between the eternal and that which is for a time, there must be that which perpetually comes to be for the whole of time. And by tying this principle to activities as well as to essences, he can include the human soul in that which does not always participate intellect. And there is a corollary here as well. The corollary makes this clear. It says, from this it is apparent that a soul which exercises intellection only at certain times cannot directly participate in intelligence. As souls, we all have the potential to participate intellect, but it does take some training, some effort to do so, like a muscle that needs to be strengthened. So in order for us to participate nous or intellect, we must turn the eye of the soul away from the transient world towards that which is eternal and true. And this is why the theurgic aspect of our studies are vital to our growth. The way Proclus approached philosophy, and the way I present it as well, goes well beyond just cerebral exercises. We are looking for genuine transformation. So if you found this video helpful, I would appreciate you giving it a like, and also please subscribe if you don't already. That really helps the channel grow. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to leave them below. Thank you very much.